Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Indiana Avenue Pilot Project meeting to give an update on where we are, to give you some information and to answer whatever questions that you may have. This is a project that both Alderman Bill Conway of the 34th Ward and I have worked together on with the Department of Transportation. It started out as a request to try to calm traffic at 13th and Indiana. And we have asked Carl Schwarzer from the Department of Transportation to join us and to give a presentation. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will respond to them as we see them come up. Dan, do you want to add to that? Yep.
Hi, sorry about that, Alderman, trying to get this to work. Alderman Conway is actually in the waiting room or waiting to join us. So if you could just give him or let him in, and I believe he could say a few words.
Yes, that would be most appropriate. Brian, did you find him?
Yep, he's coming up right now.
Okay, great. Hey there, Alderman.
Yeah, sorry, I had a hell of a time joining. I did hear everything that's been set up to now. I just couldn't. I was just couldn't seem to get through. Yeah, no, I would echo your comments in the sense that I'm excited about this project and think we're ready to move forward and look forward to hearing concerns of the community as well as the results of Carl's study.
All right. Thanks, Alderman. Carl, we pass the baton to you.
All right. Well, thank you both, Alderman Conway and Alderman Dowell. So I'm Carl Schwarzer. I'm a coordinating engineer on the CDOT traffic design team. I do apologize if there's any noise from my dog here. He's a little rowdy tonight. But I'm going to start just with a quick overview of the history of this project, some of CDOT's findings and recommendations, and then we'll touch on kind of next steps for where we see this going. So I will go camera off while I share the presentation here, just so we can all focus on the slides as I speak. So I'm going to stop my video and I will share the presentation. I'll try and keep the chat up on the side, but if anything comes up, someone may need to let me know. So first of all, can everyone see the presentation on the screen now? I see some thumbs up. Excellent.
Yes,
Thank you. All right. Oops. Here we go. All right, just a quick project overview here. So the timeline on this is CDOT attended a Ward 3 town hall in December 2022 to focus on issues at 13th and Indiana. It was meant to be a forum of community concerns. We ultimately issued a traffic study on, apologize for the dog, on February 17th, 2023. That was a summary of that community meeting and ultimately included this recommendation that we'd like to do a parking restoration on this corridor. So what you see on the right side of this image here is a summary of the flyer that went out when the parking was restored here. And you can see that on the blocks on Indiana from Roosevelt down to 14th Street, there was just 2 travel lanes in both directions. When you got south of 14th Street, parking was restored on that curb lane, so there was only 1 travel lane. So we had, along with our recommendations of how could we calm traffic on this corridor, we thought, well, we could test restoring parking on Indiana the rest of the way to Roosevelt. Just number one, that taking away a travel lane does have an inherent traffic calming effect. And then also that will ultimately open our toolbox to other further traffic calming treatments that can be done out there. Ultimately, that parking pilot was implemented in August 2023. You can even see in this image here, hopefully you can see my mouse on the screen, that parking was not restored on Indiana northbound, north of 13th Street. That portion has a right turn lane at Roosevelt that we did not want to interfere with. So that portion still remained 2 northbound travel lanes, with one of those being a right turn lane at Roosevelt and then one of them being a left turn lane at Roosevelt. Following that being installed in August, there were some questions about if this portion could be assigned as residential permit parking space out there. We did a little research and it turned out that this area was already defined as an RPP zone. And it's just that these blocks had not previously had parking. When parking was restored out there, we did go ahead and proceed with installing those RPP signs, and those are currently signed as residential permit parking zone. Following that implementation of the pilot study, we've done several different types of data collection out here. So what we have on the screen right here is a comparison of crash data in the 4 years or 3 years leading up to the pilot and then the pilot itself. And we kind of chose the same months that this installation has been out there. So you'll see that all of these start in August, which is the month that the pilot was implemented. And then the data goes through July of that year, which is obviously the current month now, in which we've most recently updated the crash data. Just a note on data types of this type. When the data sets are really small, it's hard to draw a conclusion about major trends or causes or effects. But what we can take away from this is that adding the parking out there has not led to a notable increase in crashes. So you'll see that, if you compare the first 3 columns, which were the 2 travel lane condition, to that 4th column, which is our pilot study here, you can see that there has not been a market increase in crashes across that period. So, and ultimately, we've seen very few reported instances of crashes involving parked cars. So based on this, the conclusion we take away here is that this pilot condition of restoring parking on Indiana has not led to a new crash issue of any nature. So we don't feel like crashes are, one of the factors we need to consider in looking at, was the pilot successful? One of the recurring comments that was received throughout the whole process was questions about if 13th and Indiana could be signalized. So as part of the pilot, we did collect traffic counts out there. That's what you can see on the right-hand side here is we have hourly traffic volumes for the 4 approaches across a 12-hour period. And our takeaway from this is this intersection does not meet traffic signal warrants. Those warrants are defined in the manual on uniform traffic control devices. And it really looks at the mix of traffic on the major street, traffic on the side streets, and then there's certain criteria you have to meet to quote unquote warrant a traffic signal. Since we don't meet the warrants here, this is not something where we would proceed with recommending signalization at 13th and Indiana, which is all the more reason that we want to talk about those further traffic calming elements that may be possible now that we're discussing making the parking permanent out there. Observations included, we did some our own engineers were on site making observations. We have video recordings of the site to help us with our evaluations. And one of our takeaways were, we wanted to look at a typical morning, a typical evening, just weekday travel patterns. Typically, when we're looking at, peak hour traffic, we kind of think about those commuter hours of 7 to 9 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. as like the major travel times on the corridor. And that's really kind of any street throughout the city of Chicago. When looking at Indiana, we do see, we have a screenshot here from a 7:30, an 8, 8:30, 9, all on the same day. And we can see that at 7:30, there's not a ton of traffic buildup. There is some congestion in that 8 to 8:30 range, but by 9 o'clock, it's already trailing off. We do acknowledge that by taking away that second travel lane, it does likely contribute to a little more feeling of congestion out there. But our takeaway was that that peak period for when that congestion is most prevalent, it is kind of within that 1 hour. A lot of streets kind of feel that throughout the city on any given day. We didn't see anything too notable about that AM rush hour. And then ultimately, again, we want to touch on all of those other benefits that can be done by restoring parking here. Similar observations in the PM peak hour. Notably, I'll point out in the morning, this camera is pointing to the south. traffic is heavier northbound. You can see a lot more northbound traffic heading towards Roosevelt, less cars heading south away from Roosevelt. That flips in the evening. So both of these cameras are looking to the north now. This image on the left is kind of right at 13th and Indiana. So this is in the median. So here is the portion where there's 2 travel lanes. This one is a little further down the block, so that other camera's kind of set right here. It's a little hard to see. The takeaway here is, we do see that there is kind of a feeling of congestion southbound, less vehicles northbound, but again, kind of that same condition existed. We didn't do the same for images just because with this nighttime image, it's a little harder to see. These videos are from November when it's already dark by 5:30. But we kind of reached the same conclusion that, yes, there is a little congestion that you may feel during that rush hour, but again, it was nothing out of the ordinary for a typical street in the city of Chicago. This also included field observations during Soldier Field events. This was recorded during a Bears game on a Thursday night last November. Our biggest takeaway from this is we did observe, this is again set in that median right at 13th and Indiana looking north. Throughout the whole observation period, we saw many periods where that curb lane that is meant to be a northbound right turn at Roosevelt had issues with Uber and Lyft and taxis, limos, various professional driving services were parking up that curb line. We had reached out to OEMC about doing some parking enforcement there. It's going to be a continued concern. It's going to be a point of emphasis. But that was kind of the biggest contributing factor to the worst congestion that was happening out there. We want to address that. But otherwise, again, yes, less vehicles are moving through than when there was 2 lanes, but nothing alarmed us about what we saw out there. Throughout the whole pilot period, both wards were collecting comments from the community. So the next couple of slides really just acknowledge some of the more frequent comments we've received. Some of these we'll just kind of address verbally as we go through it. A few of these we have some follow-up images and recommendations. But I just wanted to thank the community for reaching out to your aldermen and communicating on what your concerns were out there. So we're just going to touch on a few of these. I'll quickly read them just for everyone's awareness. But there were comments related to double parking of vehicles blocking all traffic, since there's only one travel lane that impacted buses and emergency vehicles. There was an issue with delivery vehicles double parking in that one travel lane. That is related to this request where some buildings on the corridor were interested in getting loading zones. We'll touch on that in a second, but ultimately we did not want to proceed with that in the pilot condition. We do see a path forward on that. We'll circle back to that in just a minute. There are some comments related to turning off of Roosevelt onto Indiana. We'll have an image to touch on that. We see something we do want to change as we look at making this permanent. Again, there's a concern about emergency vehicles blocking a travel lane. We have an image of that. We do acknowledge there was that perceived congestion during Bears games. There's been some comments about landscaping in the median throughout this whole pilot process. The landscaping team has been contacted and further adjustments have already been made out there. If there's still concerns about a bush or a tree causing visibility issues, feel free to reach out to your alderman and we can continue work to get that addressed. We did have a few comments relating to cycling on the corridor. Somebody noted that in the 2-lane configuration, it felt like there was a little more space for bikers. Bikers felt like they were maybe not getting as much space when there was only the 1 lane they needed to share with cars. There were the comments related to the RPP, which was addressed. That residential permit parking zone was already added out there. And then there was concerns about illegal parking in fire hydrants and bus stops. That's an issue everywhere in the city. We definitely want to continue that as a point of emphasis. And then I don't want to downplay that we did get some positive comments. We did receive a lot of comments saying that the parking lane out there has been effective in slowing down traffic. People felt like adding that parking has been a relief for some of the parking issues that were happening around 16th Street. And then a lot of people pointed out that people were already illegally parking in this area anyway, so it's great that it's been restored as a parking area for residents to actually use instead of people just parking there illegally. Up next, I just have a few images to touch on some of those comments we received. So, here's an example of a bus that was having a hard time turning off of Roosevelt onto Indiana. So south is up on this image. Someone in your community has a drone and provided some very provocative photos here, so I do appreciate that. We do see an opportunity that as this is formalized, we want to restrict parking a little further. So these vehicles will not be parked here. Parking will be restricted a little further down Indiana Street, really providing a little more room for cars to turn out. And then once this is made permanent through ordinance, excuse me, we'll have an opportunity to add some additional pavement marking in the areas where people should not be parking anyway. So we do see that this will be corrected pretty easily as we make this permanent. There were also those concerns about emergency vehicle access. And some people noted that there were situations where emergency vehicles were fully blocking the street. I just wanted to point out here we have two examples. The image on the left is clearly a much larger response. They have more vehicles. They have emergency personnel actually closing the streets. Regardless of if this was a 1 or 2 lane street, it's very likely that the police would have the same response of fully closing the street anyway. On the right-hand side, you have an image of a smaller response with just one truck and vehicles are able to get around it. And really, this is just to say that there are situations where there might be a full blockage. There's situations where there won't be a full blockage. But in either situation, when there is an emergency response, first responders on site, they understand, obviously their first priority is getting to and responding to the emergency, but they understand the challenges that come with their vehicles parking the street, and they'll get people out there directing traffic as needed. So ultimately, we feel this is not a huge concern going into this, and we think those first responders will know how to handle the situations while they're out there. There were those increased comments in people illegally parking in bus stops. So here you have an image of a person clearly stopped in a bus stop. Up here you have a person double parked blocking a bus. This is kind of a two-pronged item that we want to address, both through increased enforcement. We want to be ticketing people parking illegally. And then we're going to touch on loading zones in a moment, and that having those loading zones out there will help. This vehicle here is likely maybe an Uber or Lyft, maybe somebody delivering something. But if there is a loading zone added, that should be go towards addressing that concern with double parking out there. So looking ahead to next steps, CDOT is going to be working with the wards to introduce the handful of ordinances that are needed to make this a permanent installation. The NEMA building was given a loading or a standing zone as part of the pilot process. We will also be coordinating with them through the ward office. They're going to be directed to apply for a loading zone through the city standard loading zone process. That involves filling out an application. There's a nominal application fee, and then the requester is then there's a small annual fee to keep that loading zone current. I also wanted to touch on that other properties along the corridor may also apply through that for the permit through the standard process. I've included a hyperlink here. Obviously, it won't work for you. Let me see if I can share that on screen. Oh, it just popped up somewhere. It is a fairly simple website that has a lot of information about the loading zone process. If you simply search Chicago loading zone, you'll find this landing page very quickly. It gives you a lot of information about what the process is, what the fees are, and then it's an online submittal process. I'll note that typically this is a little more of a residential street. We don't love to use loading zones in residential streets. They're typically meant for more residential corridors. With that said, we understand the challenges of having just the one travel lane out there, the concerns about double parking. So we do see larger residential buildings on the corridor. I cannot guarantee it. I'm not involved with a group that ultimately approves these, but larger residential buildings are very likely to get that approved. Smaller buildings such as a single family home, a duplex, a small cluster of townhomes, that may not get through as easily. There may be concerns about, we don't want loading zones, on the entire block, on every single block. So there will be a little scrutiny on that application process, but the resources are out there for anyone that would like more information about it. Then once the dust is settled on passing the ordinances, making this all formally final, knowing what loading zones may or may not be out there, CDOT will continue working with the ward offices on further treatments that may be possible. So the image on the right is something that's kind of been shared throughout this coordination process of, CDOT does see some value in pursuing attached curb extensions at 13th and Indiana. So this would essentially, the curb line that exists today would actually turn out into the street, take up that curb space where parking had previously been allowed. And this really has a lot of benefits. Both it shortens the pedestrian crossing distance. So now a pedestrian is only crossing the 1 lane of traffic instead of the previous 2 lane of traffic. The stop sign that's currently way outside the intersection over here will move over into the new curb extension. So a vehicle traveling on Indiana will see a stop sign kind of in line with the parked cars on the street rather than way off to the side. And that narrower opening does have, a traffic calming effect where vehicles tend to slow down next to that, may be more likely to stop at the intersection. Cars won't be able to go side by side at the intersection. So, this is something that we want to continue discussing with the ward, consider for future implementation. That's the more aggressive treatment. I think, stepping down from that, I think there's an opportunity for a number of pavement marking changes out there. We may look into parking lane lines to kind of define those parking areas. There may be an ability to hatch out no parking tow zone areas to make it much more visually clear that cars should not be parking there. So again, as this gets formalized, we're going to continue working with the ward on, what else can be done next now that we've established that pilot is permanent. So all of this was a very quick overview of how we got to this point. I wanted to give us plenty of time for discussion. So at this point, I can turn it back over to the alderman. Unfortunately, my chat was closed. So Alderman, I don't know if you'd like to moderate the questions.
Excuse me. Thank you, Carl, for your presentation. Brian is going to look and read the questions in the chat, and it will either be for me, Alderman Conway, or for you.
Excellent. Thank you, Alderman Dowell. I'm sorry my camera doesn't seem to be working. I don't want to mess with the technology and have something go wrong. So Bill Murphy says there's severe traffic from 14th through 13th regularly. Parking on 13th North seems to exacerbate the backups. So that's one of the comments that we've heard. And Carl, we've talked about that a little bit. Do you want to put any color on that question? Because it will come up a couple times.
Yeah, obviously I acknowledge, you live in the community. We love your feedback. I'm not there every day. We've done a number of site visits. We do acknowledge there are times that congestion is heavier than it would have been if there was 2 travel lanes. I would point out that on that corridor, prior to the pilot going in, south of 14th was already 1 lane in either direction. So by extending this, especially in the northbound direction, we really only restored that parking for 1 block. In the southbound direction, obviously, it's 2 blocks that parking got restored. And we really just want to emphasize all of those other safety improvements that are possible with that parking restored, along with the benefits of having the additional parking out there for the community to enjoy.
Thank you, Carl. Next question is from Ashley A. How is this pilot program communicated to the community effects? We received no warning at all. Alderman Dowell, I can explain our outreach efforts on these if you'd like.
Sure.
So I know that we've done 2 or 3 community meetings, Carl, on this issue. Alderman Dowell's had it in her newsletter and her e-communications 3 or 4 times. Signs were also posted on the street for 2 weeks, 3 weeks in advance of this effort going in. So we've tried to make ample outreach to the community. If you're not on Alderman Dowell's newsletter list, or if you're not on Alderman Conway's newsletter list, please go to our websites. We can get you on there and make sure that you're up to date and communicated all this information like we've done for this pilot program as well.
Yeah, I'll just add that our email address for those of you that have a pen or pencil is ward03@cityofchicago.org. Bill, I don't know if you wanted to add.
Yeah,
it.
well, since you just said it that easily, ours is the same, Ward 34 at cityofchicago.org.
Kathleen Morey says they live in Roosevelt, Michigan, and had RPP permits and guest passes up until last April. Now they're being told they do not have permission. Will the building's permission be restored? We're in Ward 4. Just like some more information about that. So Alderman Conway.
Yeah, I'll just mention that any change related to that, to my knowledge, is not related to this pilot. Alderman Conway, I don't know if you want to touch on that.
Yeah, I'm not, of course, Ward 4 isn't mine. So that would be the north, going north from there.
Oh yes, I'm sorry about that, Alderman Conway.
No worries. No worries.
Roosevelt.
Yeah, you may want to reach out. Typically, I believe the finance department may be related to the RPP zones.
Yeah.
Alderman Dowell, I don't know if that's an appropriate question for your office to receive and then get clarification on which addresses are tied to the zone.
Yeah.
We can do that. I think that the alderman of the fourth ward has to be
Oh.
willing to do a letter of exception. That's not issued out of my office or Alderman Conway's office.
Yeah, I apologize. I misunderstood Ward 4.
No
Makes
worries.
sense, but yes, we should continue that coordination.
Mary Beth Weigel says, I thought the session was to contribute information about whether to continue on this street parking or not, but your speaker makes it clear in his presentation that the decision has been made to make this pilot permanent. The email about this session should have made it clear that the decision has already been made. As a local citizen, I do not feel heard or able to impact this decision.
I guess my response to that is that we need to move forward with some improvements in the area in order to address the questions that were raised by residents earlier regarding the speed of traffic, the accidents that were occurring at 13th and Indiana, the lack of parking for residents. I think we've done that. If you have something in particular that we have not addressed, I would ask that you let me or Alderman Conway know. And, we'll look and see how we might be able to address that as Carl is putting the finer points on this pilot program improvements. Our intention was never just to ram anything down anyone's throat. We have had a number of meetings to get feedback from residents, and we're always looking to take more feedback if necessary.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of that. We've had the pilot going on for about a year now. And we've certainly received a lot of feedback, frankly, most of it positive. There was concerns that we received about loading zones. We've already sort of adjusted the one outside the NEMA building, which seemed to help like Uber Eats and DoorDash type folks. And then after talking with Carl about how we can go about another one at 1250 South Indiana, but that was really, I would say, unless I missed something, 100% of the complaints we received on this. And I think we have a pathway to solving those. So, the feedback that we've had over the last year has been relatively positive on that, which is why at least I feel comfortable moving forward.
And speaking of the NEMA, the next two questions are actually about the NEMA and its parking and the loading zone. So NEMA has an entrance to its parking lot. Entrance to cars often back up in Indiana, causing problems for cars turning to southbound Indiana. And they also say that NEMA did not plan for all the deliveries they get in their driveway, that the drivers park with hazard lights on and often block traffic there. Could NEMA enable parking for deliveries in the alley?
Ooh, I'm not sure on the alley side. I will say that it was that. I mean, they're I forget the French term for it, but their circular driveway inside is pretty large and should be ready to accommodate. But it was that, it was making sure that wouldn't be a problem was what was the reasoning behind putting the I can't remember if it's a loading or standing zone, but putting that zone outside, just outside the building there, which we hope alleviates the problem.
Lee Benish says, South Indiana, do we need to reapply for 1250 South Indiana? I wanted to talk about RPP for their loading zone. I'm not quite sure which one.
I suspect we did receive some comments about loading zones at that address throughout this process. If that is what they're referencing, I would encourage you to go ahead and reapply now. There was, I think, some concern about how to handle those permits during the pilot process. If we're exiting the pilot phase, I think, we've touched base with the the Division of Sign Management that handles the review of those permits. And my understanding is they will be reviewed at this time.
Yeah, I would echo that. In fact, Carl and I spoke about a loading zone at 1250 literally today, and the pathway. Now, in fully recognizing he's not the one who makes that decision, but my office is certainly tracking that we want to put one there. Dan, I don't know if you can say, do people actually need to reapply, or are we tracking that?
Alderman, I'll follow up with Lee tomorrow.
Okay,
I know
great.
they've already applied for it, and we'll see where they're at and what we need to do to get this done. But with CDOT agreeing to it, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, and which, I know Carl didn't fully agree to it because it's not his thing. So I don't want to put words in his mouth, but we had a discussion that we thinks it checks all the boxes with regard to thing. But I will say Dan will follow up, but at minimum, we're certainly tracking that was an issue that we want to solve for here.
Next question is from Kim H, and it's a multi-part question. I think one of them is at least for Carl. A few questions, comments from neighbors on the townhomes on Indiana and 13th Street. Would CDOT consider extending the median on Indiana to protect the crosswalk, similar to the 14th and Indiana intersection? That's Carl. The second question is, traffic is particularly challenging during private events at Soldier Field, not Bears games. Entire intersections are blocked with no exits available. They sent videos, and just that's a comment that we need to get with OEMC for traffic control during those non-Bears game event games. And then they've also noticed a limited street sweeping on Indiana since the beginning of the year.
Okay, Carl, if you could take that first one, and there's several other, I see that question regarding that extension of the median and other questions as I'm looking down the rest of these questions here. So if you can answer that, I know you looked at it.
Yeah,
I'll
absolutely.
address some of the others.
Yeah. So we did look at the possibility of extending that median nose there. There's a couple of geometric factors that makes it a little challenging at this location. Typically, you want that median nose to extend a little bit past the crosswalk itself to create a raised element to prevent people from getting into that crosswalk. With the raised crosswalks that's there and the configuration of the east and west streets and where they cross the street, we really can't add a median nose that sticks out far enough into the intersection to protect the crosswalk itself without becoming an obstruction inside the intersection itself. So again, we can continue to reevaluate that, see if there's other paths forward as we talk about these other options there now that we've kind of established the pilot. But that really was kind of our initial evaluation that geometrically it's a little challenging at this location.
All right, and on the question of the traffic and the parking along Indiana northbound between 13th and Roosevelt, that's an ongoing issue that we have to continue to have conversations with OEMC and the first district about. We did have earlier in the year, we had some conversation with OEMC. I think they placed some traffic aids at 13th and Indiana, which actually helped calm that area down a bit. And we need to do more enforcement there. So that's something that I'm committed to having a further discussion with OEMC and the police department on. Regarding street sweeping on Indiana is done according to a schedule. That street sweeping schedule is on the city's website. It's done once a month between, I believe, April and November. And if you need information about the street sweeping schedule, if you send an email to me or to Alderman Conway's office, we'll provide you with a link.
Next question is from Catherine Grogan. What about 13th Street between Indiana and Michigan? Especially on the north side of 13th Street, illegally parked cars that block traffic and cause congestion.
Yeah, if there is an ongoing issue with illegal parking, there should be an increase in enforcement. Your ward office, so I believe that corner is going to be Ward 34, can assist with requesting increased enforcement there. And then part two of that is, that is a location where there's been, conversation about establishing a loading zone at 1240 South Indiana. That should provide some outlet for people that are currently illegally parking on 13th Street.
Timothy Ray, just a comment, congestion does not occur during Bears game, or not just occur during Bears games. It's in the event that is at Soldier Field or Grant Park. Their driveway is also often blocked when there's an event. The pilot project was added more congestion during any given weekend. There are also cars that are parked on the streets without permits. No one is parked illegally on a constant basis. In over the 20 years they've lived at 1356 South Indiana Avenue. Failed to understand why this was necessary to begin with. It was tried years ago when Fioretti was alderman, and he decided to scrap the plan after concerns of residents. This does not calm traffic. I think we've addressed a few of those.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I wish you hadn't erased that so quick, Brian. I needed to look at that question again. I think on the question of parking congestion, congestion is not just during Bears games. We're aware of that. And that is part of the reason why OEMC added an additional aid at 13th in Indiana to try to address some of that congestion issue. Secondly, on the fact that people are not are illegally parking in RPP spaces, that's a call to the police department. You can also email our office, and from time to time, we can have a mission by the Department of Finance go through that RPP area and issue tickets as a way to inform people that they're parking illegally.
Mit Seder says, in the section you are talking, you have multiple large high rises on the east of the street and Nemo. That population spills into the section you are opening to the parking, which I suspect will create havoc with traffic since it gets added to the traffic coming from 13th and further south.
Yeah, I would only say that's why we're putting the loading zones outside 1250 as well as outside Nema to try and solve that or improve that situation. Carl, I don't know if you want to add to that, but that's why the purpose of that is.
So I believe this is referring to a new development that has not been constructed yet. I'm not entirely certain of the status. I believe it's through various rounds of approvals. I do not know the status of, if the, when construction may start on that. But I will say, I believe that development had a traffic analysis. It's gone through the plan review committee and the various processes that are required for new developments. I can't speak on much more beyond that on the proposed development there.
Dave Lashuk says, I've been very pleased with the results of the pilot program. What are the prospects of also allowing parking on northbound Indiana north of 13th Street?
Yeah, as we touched on, there is that northbound right turn lane approaching Roosevelt. That is an area of emphasis for OEMC. It's really that portion of northbound Indiana getting onto Roosevelt. We don't want to cause any other issues with Soldier Field traffic management plans through OEMC. So at this time, our expectation is that northbound right turn lane is going to remain there.
Ed Humbert says, I see pedestrians crossing Indiana on the north side of 13th consistently. Why is a crosswalk not included in this plan?
Yeah, so we've had multiple rounds of conversation about that through every public meeting and outreach with the community we've had. So there was many factors that went into that, again, kind of related to the existing geometry out there, the uh, lack of receiving sidewalk heading into the private development on the east side or down 13th Street, which is a private street, I should say. And ultimately, this all started with a conversation about safety at 13th and Indiana. And due to the landscape median, the configuration of the street, the way it fans out into two northbound receiving lanes with that right turn lane approaching Roosevelt, adding a new crosswalk there is really just going to create even more pedestrian vehicle conflicts than exist today, along with all of those other geometric challenges out there. So it was not something that CDOT recommended at the time that we've had these conversations.
Nadine Ferreira adds that the new traffic plan is awful, that the traffic from McCormick and events and concerts is really so much worse. She's out every day, bikes cannot get through at all, then they're on the sidewalks, which are not in good condition.
Well, I would say what was her name?
It's Nadine
Oh,
Ferreira.
Ms. Barada. Regarding the sidewalks, if you have sidewalks that are particularly hazardous or a trip hazard, you need to let me know. And we'll look into it and try to correct it.
John O'Halloran says, what observations have you observed at the Indiana Roosevelt intersection? Does the northbound to eastbound green arrow solve or create safety for pedestrians and bike traffic at this very congested intersection? Also, will restrictions on NEMA be implemented on the proposed 1325 Indiana development?
1235 Indiana.
I'm
I'll
sorry,
take
1235,
that.
yes.
I'll take that one, Carl, after you answer the first part.
Sure. So specifically, the performance of the Roosevelt, Indiana intersection was outside kind of the pilot here. Outside of our concerns about those vehicles being able to turn onto the street, we didn't necessarily look at capacity or performance of that intersection. If there is a concern about safety at that location, you can communicate that to your alderman and they can request a separate traffic study where we can follow up and analyze that.
And regarding 1235 Indiana, working with CDOT, none of the ingress and egress of traffic is situated on Indiana, like the NEMA is situated on Indiana, ingress and egress. In addition, what they call a lay-by, I think that's what you call them, Carl, is that it? When you carve out a little driveway space, what's that called?
Yeah, I would call that a lay-by lane
A
where,
lay-by, right,
yeah, where
right,
you do add a new pavement area outside of the curb line. So your curb
correct.
line curves out and adds space.
Okay, the developer had requested that, and that request was denied by CDOT, so there will not be a lay-by lane on Indiana. All of the ingress and egress, Ubers will be directed to 13th Street.
Timothy Ray asks, how will it be determined when or if this becomes permanent?
Yeah,
There was also a question about when this would become before city council, which is kind of related.
well, we don't have we're off now until September in terms of city council meetings. I would like to get some feedback. Alderman Conway and I are in conversation. I think we're in agreement that we want to move forward with the permanent implementation of aspects of the pilot program. That's why we're having this meeting. And if there are some concerns that are not addressed, please let us know, but we'll be looking at this in the fall.
Patrick Dorn asks, is there any data about speed reductions or changes during the pilot? That was not covered. His observation would be that speeds seem relatively unchanged.
Well, we did not specifically collect any speed data at this time. I would remind everyone that this is restoring the parking is just step one of possible traffic calming treatments. With the parking made permanent, there are, there's curb extensions, pavement marking changes that may be on the table for further speed reductions out there.
Nadine Ferrata adds, I'm pretty aware, and this was not widely communicated in the first place. I would like to see the positive comments you have all received.
I mean, I would merely say that my office, which is sort of a smaller part of the pilot, received a lot of feedback on this from property managers and residents alike. So, I mean, it seemed like not to mention, I know there was community meetings that predated me as well as since then. So we have certainly done our best to communicate this as best that we can over the course of the last year this has been in place.
And I've explained how we communicated, which is basically by email and community meetings, Zoom meetings. I think we've had 3. This might make 4. And Ms. Ferrata, I would just add that, please send us your email address so that you can get on our email list. We put something out monthly. We also send alerts and notifications weekly. And so there's lots of information that comes from the ward office. That's the best way the best tool that we have to communicate. We also communicate by putting this information on our website. Lillian Fleming, I see you have your hand up. We're not, you need to put your question in the chat. I don't want you to go home feeling your question wasn't answered. Please put your question in the Q&A.
And Lee Benish, if you don't mind elaborating a little bit, your question about loading zones.
I can actually answer. Lee, we're tracking 1250. You need a loading zone. We'll check with Dan. Dan's on it. We'll check with CDOT tomorrow if we need to reapply, or we can simply move your application forward.
Thank you, Alderman Conway. The anonymous attendee says, how will the new building on the northeast corner of Indiana and 13th impact the traffic plan? We are hearing that the exit to the building's parking will be on 13th, which is a small street as is. That's concerning.
Well, it's a smaller development. It's not a high rise like many of its neighbors. So there won't be as many cars. But it is a private street, and as this is part of the planned development for that museum campus area, they do have the access to that private street. Their traffic plan was reviewed by the Department of Transportation.
Neil asks, can this program continue as a trial after the changes being proposed are in place?
Carl, I defer to you, but we're kind of making traffic adjustments and doing continuous improvement all over the wards and all over the city. So, we want to get it to a point where it's where we think it's in a good place, but we can always make modifications.
Yeah, I'll just echo Alderman Conway. So yeah, just to clarify, in case there was any misunderstanding, the pilot has been in place now for quite some time. Everything we discussed here is, there were some comments that received. There needs to be a few adjustments as we formalize this. But for the most part, yeah, hopefully that addresses your concern here. We want to see the tweaks, but for the most part, everything we've discussed has been in place already.
Anonymous attendee asks, what problems are we trying to solve with this program? All the data presented at the beginning of this meeting indicates that there's barely a change in how the corridor traffic is working, other than more street parking.
Yeah, so I'll start by just mentioning, I apologize if it didn't make this clear. I kind of wanted to get through the presentation quickly, so we had a lot of time to cover these comments. This all started in 2022. Well, it certainly predates 2022, but it was revisited in 2022. Concerns about pedestrian safety at 13th and Indiana. And ultimately, what we had found is 13th and Indiana was 2 travel lanes in both directions. And with that configuration, there was really nothing that could be done to improve pedestrian safety at 13th and Indiana. So in the discussions, taking away one of those travel lanes, making permanent parking lanes out there would just free up a lot of new tools in the toolbox to both improve safety at 13th and Indiana and on the whole corridor itself. So apologies for not making that clear at the start.
Brian, I would ask that you not delete the questions until the question's been fully answered, because there was something at the end of that question that I was getting ready to respond to, but I can't.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's in the answered box.
Okay,
Yeah, it was about regard to address parking for residents. This program doesn't seem to benefit the community. It impacts.
right, okay, right. So, a lot of the property owners around there have garages or, have parking garages or individual garages for some of the buildings on Indiana. We're adding to the residents' abilities to have parking on the street by adding residential permit parking, which is earmarked specifically for residents in the area. I think the pilot program does increase the net number of parking spaces for residents in the area, which is a positive.
I think Ms. Ferrata's question has been answered. The new proposed building on the east side of the street, I believe will be additional rental building. Well, where will access to the proposed building parking be?
Sorry, access to the parking will be on 13th Street. The new plans for the building have been presented at 2 community meetings. One community meeting or meeting with the condo association, where I was encouraged to not have a high-rise built there, but to have less units, not to do another NEMA. So that's been done. Again, Nadine, I would ask that you join our email list so that you are up to speed on things going on in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Mitch Sater wants to elaborate on his question. He's talking about the existing high rises, their high rise, which is shorter, has 300 apartments and approximately 2 cars per apartment. Mitt's question was about a lot of large existing buildings on the east of the street and the NEMA, and how that spills into the section you're opening up with parking, which would create further problems with parking on 13th and further south.
Yeah. So again, the pilot has been out there for quite some time now. So if we're talking about the existing buildings, everyone in the community has had the opportunity to see what that, resulting travel patterns are of the pilot out there. And again, from our perspective, we have not seen anything that would discourage us from pursuing this parking restoration in order to pursue all of those other safety improvements.
Timothy Ray asked, why is this pilot necessary? At best, you're adding 10 or so cars on each side between 13th and 14th on the east and west sides of the street. I believe that's been addressed a couple of times if anybody wants to add any more.
Carl, could you just state again what we were trying to solve for?
Sure. Yeah, these initial meetings were all about pedestrian safety at 13th and Indiana. People feel uncomfortable crossing Indiana. There have been a history of some pedestrian vehicle conflicts crossing 13th and Indiana. It is kind of an atypical situation out there with that wide landscaped median. So even with that raised crosswalk out there, the issue is, you have a lot of lanes, you have 2 lanes approaching. It's not always clear when one car stops, the other car goes. A stopped car may be blocking the view of a pedestrian stepping out in front of the other car. So really, there was lots of rounds of coordination and community comment regarding safety issues at 13th and Indiana. And again, our hands were kind of tied when it was those two travel lanes in both directions, just very little we can do to further improve safety there. So we wanted to do the pilot, test the parking restoration. Now that that's permanent, we're going to continue working with the wards on further treatments that can be pursued here.
Anonymous attendee adds, when there are large concerts at Soldier Field, livery vehicles and ride shares clog up the neighborhood. Is there a staging area and pickup spot east of DuSable Lakeshore Drive that could be used to ban those vehicles between DuSable Lakeshore Drive and Michigan? So I know that that livery vehicles and rideshare are supposed to pick up on um, what is that, Congress Parkway or Columbus Drive? That's supposedly be the staging area. They're supposed to be geo-fenced out of this neighborhood from pickup and drop off. That doesn't seem to be incredibly effective, though it's more effective than if those weren't in place. They're also supposed to not be let into the neighborhood by the traffic control aides that are there. Um, but those livery vehicles, they do need to be shooed away through enforcement by the police and the traffic control aides that are there at that time. And they should be doing that. And those are conversations that can be had with OEMC and the first district to reinforce that those types of vehicles are not supposed to be clogging up the traffic and pickup lanes throughout the ward during those events.
I'll just add that I've committed to having continuing conversations with OEMC and CPD. Cars should not be parked and waiting for pickup, the limousines, the livery drivers, the Ubers on Indiana between Roosevelt and 13th northbound. It would help to have some residents complain to at their CAPS meeting or at the local police to let them know that you support my efforts in this area. And it so continues to be a work in progress.
Catherine Morey says, we are a trifurcated ward, wards 3, 4, and 34, and Ward 4 is being offline. We are represented from Michigan to state by 3 wards. Our 4th ward is important since 58,000 residents live here. And we have Grant Park. Our building is at Roosevelt. We hope to be an important part of the conversations since we have been here for a long time.
I would just note that the 2 wards that were included are the ones that actually have frontage on this street. They're the wards that will ultimately have ordinance authority over these streets. Alderman Dowell or Conway, you can certainly expand on this further if you'd like.
You know, listen, I contacted the Department of Transportation because my constituents were complaining about rightfully so, about the lack of in traffic stopping at Roosevelt and Indiana and 13th. One of my constituents was hit by a car, another one almost was hit by a car. So this was an attempt to address to slow down the traffic, to reduce the incidents at 13th and Indiana. And I haven't had anyone call me, honestly, in the last year that this pilot program has been going on that's been having any trouble crossing that area now.
Maureen Joyce says regarding 1235 South Indiana, you say the ingress and egress is on 13th Street side, and 13th is a privately owned street.
Right. Hi, Maureen. Yes, 13th Street is a privately owned street, but 1235 South Indiana is part of the large plan development for the museum campus, and they have access to that street. So, you know, that's the way it is.
Timothy Ray says, should we come before city council to address our concerns? Seems like your mind is already made up. I would say that, Mr.
I
Gray,
would never tell someone not to come to, a city council meeting to address your concerns. But the whole purpose of these meetings over the last year and a half has been to address the concerns that I'm speaking for you too, Alderman Conway, that we have heard from our constituents. Timothy, if you have, something specific, regarding this, please let me know.
Yeah, I echo your comments. I was not, the pilot was, at least the plan for the pilot was already, conceived before I took office, but, I would certainly echo, Alderman Dowell's comments with regard to the feedback that's been received, but, certainly, we, in city council, there's time at the beginning of every meeting to hear from the public, and if you'd like to come address city council, that's certainly, your prerogative as that of any resident of the city.
Catherine Maury, why are you not in conversation with Ward for Alderman Robinson?
Alderman Robinson's ward is not impacted by the issue we were trying to solve for, which was, pedestrian, and vehicular conflict at 13th and Indiana. All of the focus of this pilot program has been south of Indiana and Roosevelt. The fourth ward, I believe, I'm not exactly clear, but goes, starts north of, Roosevelt Road. And I don't know how far west it goes.
Clark Street. So,
Ashley A. When there's no parking in the street, people typically don't constantly park illegally. Placing the burden on residents to observe and report illegal parking is unrealistic and unsustainable. Eliminating a lane of traffic doesn't calm traffic, it just slows the stream of cars, making people sit in traffic longer. The increased time spent in traffic causes drivers to become impatient and upset, make it more dangerous for pedestrians and bikers at the intersection. This can cause chain reaction, pushing bikes onto the sidewalk and increasing hazards for pedestrians. Is adding 1 block's worth of parking worth increased danger for pedestrians? Have alternate options like adding a bike lane been considered?
so yeah, thank you for this question. I feel like portions of this we've already touched on multiple times, regarding the increased congestion. First, regarding your question about bike lanes, this corridor has not really been discussed as a potential bike route. Parking is already or has been established, south of 14th Street. This isn't necessarily a street that it has a good configuration for it or long-term planning related to that. We do have a separate bike-related team at CDOT. It is something that can be discussed with them in the future. It's not something that's really been discussed at this point in time. Now, one other thing that I would like to circle back and touch on is there have been references to congestion, and obviously we know, during morning rush hour, evening rush hour, Soldier Field events, yes, there is congestion out there. By establishing parking on the street and looking into these further traffic calming elements, that's not just going to be a benefit during peak hours. It's going to be a benefit during those other 20 hours of a day where there's a lot less vehicle traffic out there. What we can find is some of the riskier times to be a pedestrian at an intersection like 13th and Indiana is when there is not congestion out there. If, in the previous condition before the pilot went in place and there was 2 northbound travel lanes approaching 13th Street, during the times of day, let's say 10 p.m., where there's not a lot of cars out there, as a driver, you may know the stop sign's there, and you may know that at 10 p.m. there's no other cars at that intersection. You're going to be, drivers may be more likely to roll through that intersection. But by creating all of these other safety features, we're really addressing that safety concern at all times of the day, not just when traffic is busier out there. People can drive a little more erratically when there's less traffic, and that's something we're trying to address through all of this as well.
I'd like to add, Carl, that there is established bike lanes on Wabash Avenue, 2 blocks away.
Yes,
So that
excellent
is a
point.
preferred method for people on their bikes to travel. Patrick Dorn asks Alderman Dowell, you mentioned that you are inclined to proceed with making this permanent. Could resident feedback change your mind at this point?
I'd like to hear what the feedback is, Patrick. I'm certainly always open to hearing feedback. But what I set out to accomplish, which was what my constituents asked me to get rid of, was the vehicular and pedestrian conflict that occurred at 13th and Indiana. I believe the pilot program has accomplished that based on the results that I've seen over the last year that this pilot has been in place. And we have seen a reduction in accidents. Although the number is small, it's still to me significant that there's been a reduction. So, I won't say my mind can't be changed, but I would certainly like to hear more of an argument if you can present one. Thank you, Patrick.
Nadine Ferreira brought still over 100 units. I'm not quite sure what that refers to.
She's referring to 1325. Excuse me, 1235 South Indiana. Yes, Nadine, it's still over 100 units, but it's certainly less than the 900 or 600 or 400 in many of these high rises. It's a small building of only approximately 100 units.
Timothy Ray adds, nothing has changed since the pilot program has been in place in terms of safety. The numbers are still the same. How has safety been improved?
We have touched on that a number of times, but again, I'll just emphasize that at a smaller residential intersection like this, numbers are lower. It's harder to kind of make a real solid conclusion. There's some randomness involved. But again, we have been working to address those safety concerns that go beyond just reported crashes.
Lillian Fleming says this area has a true community feeling, but now the development of our beloved neighborhood has been taken over by absent developers. Who benefits from this development? Not the kids, not the pets, not the important feeling of community. It's more than traffic.
I don't have a response to that. I don't know what she means by absent developers. Everything that is around us at this point is already developed. And the developers of 1235 South Indiana are from Chicago or Chicago area. And although they haven't built, they have come before the community on a number of occasions, will come before the Plan Commission or has gone before the Plan Commission. So, that's all I can say about that. I think also that their development does include a park, which was part of the planned development to provide more open space to help create community in that area.
She also asks, do you know the company who's behind this development?
Yeah, I do, but I don't have their information at my fingertips. Again, if she sends me an email at ward03@cityofchicago.org, I can give her that information tomorrow.
Anonymous attendee is clarifying, Alderman Dowell, I believe Catherine Maury is asking why you've disallowed Fourth Ward parking on Indiana as we have had since 2008. Please, perhaps you could explain why you've disallowed those that have parked there since 2008.
I don't know what she's talking about. 2008 is, I wasn't the alderman in 2008 in that location. So I really don't know what you're talking about, anonymous attendee.
Yeah, if you could send a follow-up email, we can hopefully clarify. Shion Hotop, not a question or a comment. Thank you for this pilot. I feel much safer crossing at 13th in Indiana. Lee Benish also has a comment. I appreciate how well both aldermen are working together. Thank you both. Timothy Ray adds, I'd be happy to meet with both aldermen. I look forward to meeting with you. I will get in touch with their officers to schedule a meeting. And He asks again why this pilot was necessary, which I believe we've addressed. Anonymous attendee, in efforts to solve for pedestrian safety, it doesn't seem that we've definitely solved for the problem and instead have created several new problems we need to involve OEMC and CPD to solve.
Well, I'll respond to that. OEMC and CPD would have to solve problems whether we had this pilot program or not. The parking, the fact that Ubers and limousines are parking on Indiana has been a problem prior to this pilot program. And we always need to have OEMC and CPD review their plans to update them to see where we can better address the traffic management concerns that people have in the area. That's one of the reasons why they added a traffic management person at 13th in Indiana, something that I would like to see be made permanent, because I received some really good feedback from residents in that area that was helpful.
I think the last question we have is, can Aldermans Conway and Dowell share the specific concerns that were expressed to them by residents on Indiana Avenue that made them feel that this pilot project was necessary?
I think I've said this a number of times. My constituents were coming to me because they felt unsafe crossing 13th in Indiana. There were a number of incidents where cars either hit people or almost hit people, and we needed to address that. I feel good about the pilot because the problem I was trying to solve, I believe, has been solved based on the information I've received from residents. I've had no complaints. Nobody's been hit by a car or a dog's been hit, because there's a lot of dogs that cross that intersection. I haven't had any complaints. And the numbers seem to bear this out.
Alex Murdoch, I appreciate the change. My balcony overlooks the corner of 13th in Indiana and acknowledge that there have been reduced speeds of drivers on 13th. The additional parking has been an added benefit to alleviate the congested street parking options in our community. Thank you for undertaking this project and actively leading our community. Carmen Allen on the other side says, I guess the real disappointment is that we're not being heard. I've been on 3 of these calls and our opinion is overlooked. Not to mention this has caused more congestion, illegal parking during social field events, and us not being able to get into our community easily. The traffic people and the police have not been moving anyone along. They have tons of photos to prove it. We're left to fend for ourselves. Plus, I'd like to add to the street cleaning comments, they have not been in Indiana for months. Again, I guess we have to fend for ourselves. Very disappointed.
Well, Miss Allen, I will check with our ward soup about that. I don't know specifically, I mean, we can check with our ward soup about the cleaning of Indiana. Like I said, it's done once a month. The area is posted, and I have not had one complaint from anyone on Indiana, from Indiana and at Roosevelt to Indiana and Cermak, about the lack of street cleaning by the city of Chicago. But I'll look into it. Would appreciate you reaching out to me by email, so I can at least send you the street cleaning schedule.
Anonymous attendee tries to clarify, this past year you have disallowed those from the 4th ward from permit parking on Indiana. We've only become aware of this when we tried to renew our permits. This question is, why did you change a policy that predates you as alderman? You allowed us to continue parking there when King was the 4th ward alderman.
I don't know specifically, I don't know who anonymous attendee is. I don't know where you live. I don't know if you have had any contact with our office. So anonymous attendee, if you would please send me an email at ward03 at City of Chicago, include your phone number so we can follow up with you directly. Thank you.
John Ivory, thank you all for this meeting and all the work you've put into this. And Nadine Ferrero will email you directly, and she agrees with Miss Allen. Ashley A asks, is the data covered in this presentation available for residents to review?
We can certainly share materials with the ward office. Previous traffic studies have been produced here. We can package some crash information for the ward. Typically, we share that with the ward office, and they can share that with the community as they see fit.
Which we have posted in the past.
Okay, excellent.
Timothy Ray, this is for Alderman Conway and Dowell. How are the concerns of residents who say there's not a problem balanced against those that you say have indicated there is a problem and they have lived in the block for 20 years?
I'll let you answer that, Alderman Conway. I've answered his question a couple of times.
Yeah, no, I'll say that, we look at the feedback we receive, and certainly, while Alderman Dowell and I are not traffic engineers, we try and balance as best we can. But certainly, Carl is a traffic engineer, so certainly have taken the feedback that we've received and believe we've incorporated a much improved situation here, and the pilot program seems to indicate it. No change is going to make 100% of the people happy, but on balance, I think that this one has been remarkably positive.
And that does conclude the questions that have been asked.
Well, I'll certainly thank everyone for coming. Certainly, the Alderman Dowell, I know you really led the way on this, and appreciate it, certainly for the residents of mine that are impacted. And Carl, appreciate you burning the 720 oil here as well on that. And Pat, I'm sure you have you were really the leader on this, so I'll let you close it.
Thank you, Bill. First, I want to thank Carl for the work that he's done over the last year and a half. Really great professionalism. I appreciate you being on the scene, walking the area with me, talking to people about their experience. I do appreciate that. I want to say to my constituents, I have tried to listen and to address the problems that have been brought to me as your alderman. Again, I would encourage Nadine, an anonymous attendee, to reach out to me at ward03@cityofchicago.org with more, if you're looking for more information or more detail. I also want to say to Eric Gould, thank you for showing up. I know you wrote me this afternoon, and I was hopeful that you could make this meeting as well. Okay. Good night, everyone. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all.